Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Villains have always been a major part of the Dungeons & Dragons game. It's always one of my favorite things to do, is to sit down and either design some of these villains or just sort of put my own take on them. When you think of Dungeons & Dragons, there's a lot of villains, NPCs, or enemies that come to mind pretty easily. Iconic characters such as Strahd von Zarovich from Ravenloft, Tiamat, Demogorgon, Caius from like the Age of Worms campaign setting, or campaign path. There's just all kinds of them. You know, you have Vlaakith, the leader of the Githyanki. So I wanted to talk today about one of my favorite NPCs that I feel like I kind of forgot about. A while back I did do a video on some of my favorite villains that I've had, or that I've used in the past, and while I haven't used this villain, I feel like I really should have talked about that particular person. So what I want to do today is sort of right that wrong and talk about, in my opinion, one of the most over-the-top but still cool-looking villainous NPCs of all time, and that is the legendary Warduke. So I'm just going to go over some of his early history and some of the references that I have to Warduke within my own collection. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get that started. Alright, so let's start with first things first. Warduke was originally introduced to the world through the Dungeons & Dragons action figures line put out by LJN. And yes, it is that LJN, the one with the rainbow logo that people like the Angry Video Game Nerd, the LJN Defender, and even Pat the NES Punk have referenced on a number of occasions. Now, before they were producing video games, they were a toy company, and the Dungeons & Dragons series of action figures was one of their lines from 1983. And what was actually really cool about this line, I don't have any of the figures and I would love to get them, but the action figure line actually had sort of its own backstory behind it. So you had a group of adventurers that uncovered a mysterious relic known as the Heartstone. And the Heartstone, when they were exposed to it, essentially brought their true characteristics to the surface. So Warduke is the evil fighter, and he was once best friends or close friends with the paladin Strongheart, who was the good fighter. The product line was actually based off of the Dungeons & Dragons basic rule set, to the best of my knowledge. And this is what the original Warduke looked like. So he had like the blue helmet with the black, like you can't see any of his facial features except for these menacing red eyes. He's got the shield with the skull on it and his sword, and he doesn't have much in the way of actual armor on. So that was how he was sort of first introduced, and just a really, really cool figure. It's kind of one of those holy grail items that I would love to get. I would love to get at least Warduke and Strongheart, and if I had to choose between one or the other, Warduke is the one that I would pick up for that. Also in 1983, he was released, or his stats were released, in the Shady Dragon Inn. So I got this a few weeks ago, and I haven't been able to do my full review of it yet because I'm still waiting to get my rules cyclopedia, just so I can fully understand the stat blocks and things like that. But Warduke is in here, so we'll just go ahead and show. So there's the image for him, and again, just very, very cool looking. You've got the skull shield, you've got the winged helmet, and based off this picture, Warduke is left-handed, which is how I want to imagine him, because I'm also a lefty. So having him wielding a sword with his left hand is just really cool. But these were the figures that were released. So we have Warduke's stats here. So I'm just going to set this down, and we'll just kind of zoom in on it here. Alright, so you have Warduke the Evil Fighter. So he was a level 8 character, which was pretty good for back in those days. Remember, leveling up is not as easy in the basic editions of Dungeons & Dragons as it was in things like 3rd edition, 4th edition, even 5th edition. So he has a strength of 16, an intelligence of 9, wisdom of 11, charisma of 8, dexterity 11, and looks like a charisma... oh, sorry, that's his constitution? Constitution of 8? And a charisma of 11. Wow. His alignment was chaotic, so back then I don't think they actually had good and evil necessarily as alignments. It was like chaotic, neutral, or lawful, so he had a chaotic alignment, but he is definitely the evil fighter. So he's got a level 8 AC of 2, which was good back then, because it started at 10 and worked its way down. He had 59 hit points. And I think his movement was 9. Like I said, I'm not quite sure how to read the stat blocks. I know it does say it in here, but again, I was waiting to get the full the full rule set. But he has a THAC0 of 13 or 12 if he's using his +1 sword. So it says here that he wears in his equipment, he wears plate mail, helm, shield, carries a broadsword +1 that flames on command, a battle axe, and a dagger. What's interesting is that in his description, it says Warduke wears a suit of half chain and a black winged helmet. His shield bears the sign of a demon's head. He was an old friend of Strongheart. The good Strongheart, good paladins. Of course, you got the trademark there because it was from the toy line. Let's see, both were exposed to the Heartstone, and Warduke's cruel nature was brought out while Strongheart's just nature became stronger. Warduke is a friend of Skyla's, and wears a demon device like hers. These two plan to overthrow Kellic, who is the evil mage, or the evil magic user, evil sorcerer, sorry. Once all the good fighters are beaten. Warduke captured an evil... Oh, sorry, I lost my place here. Warduke captured an evil nightmare for his mount, which you could also get through the toy line. And it frightens many of his enemies. Warduke especially hates Strongheart, who he feels wastes his time protecting the weak and the helpless. A true fighter, Warduke feels, makes himself rich and powerful by the strength of his sword arm. He takes what he can if you would keep... he takes what he can. If you would keep your possessions, kill those who seek to take them. He calls his sword Nightwind. And so that was his earliest appearance. We'll just zoom back out here. In the Shady Dragon Inn. So again, a level 8 fighter, which was pretty cool. The next time I was introduced to him was through... I can't remember exactly when this came out, but I want to say it was through the animated series. So the Dungeons & Dragons animated series also ran in the early 1980s. It looks like it ran from 1984 through 1986. This is the special edition of the cartoon series that was released. I've shown this off in a couple of other videos, but the biggest thing that I want to show is, unfortunately I don't have an image of him from the animated series on here. However, going through the episode guide, episode number 5, which came out also in 1983, so I don't know why they had this labeled as 1984. But the original air date was October 15th, 1983, in Search of the Dungeon Master. So, the description just says, while taking a leisurely ride through the forest, Dungeon Master is unexpectedly attacked by the evil bounty hunter Warduke, who freezes him inside a magical crystal. The children soon learn of Dungeon Master's capture and set out to rescue him, attempting to overcome the many obstacles in their way before Avenger can claim him first. So Warduke was in the Dungeons & Dragons animated series. He looked, I think, very similar to the action figure. And if I recall correctly, I think it's even in terms of his color scheme. And he had sort of this like raspy, sort of hissing voice. That was really, really cool. So he was in the animated series as well. In addition to that, Dungeon Magazine, one of my favorite resources of all time, featured him as their toughest critical threat ever. So Dungeon Magazine would run a series of critical threats, as what they referred to them as, and critical threats were villains that you could pull out and plug into any of your existing campaigns. They were sort of meant to be, you know, this cheap and easy resource that, you know, if you were struggling to come up with a villain, you could go through the magazine and find one that fits. So most of them were relatively low level, low to mid level, but Warduke was the highest level one I think that they ever did. I don't recall one being a higher level than him. And this was also the magazine that I was just showing off that had the image of the action figure. So let's just skip ahead until we find the critical threat that is Warduke. Here we go here. So as you can see, the art style got a little bit more sort of grim looking, so he doesn't have you know, the bright colors like the yellows and the blues. It's very much more subdued, but here we have Warduke himself. So just to read his description, because why not, it says, nearly 100 years ago, the demigod Ayuz, and I'm probably saying that wrong, so I apologize, vanished from the northern lands, imprisoned beneath Castle Greyhawk by the archmage Zygag and Yagrin. In the violent chaos that followed, a group of 13 black-hearted adventurers captured Ayuz's summer capital of Molag and created the Horn Society, a nation based on the adoration of foul beings from the lower plains. Returned Ayu's forces invaded the Horn Society's land during the recent Greyhawk Wars, putting most of the Order's malicious lords to the torch during the Festival of the Blood Moon. The unnamable hierarch, leader of the society, fell in that invasion, but rather than signaling the end of the Order, his assassination triggered a new beginning for the Horn Society. The leader was reborn as a greater devil thanks to a pact with the arch-fiend Beelzebul. With his newfound power, the unnamable hierarch began to assemble a new Horn Society, a skulking, malevolent organization with poisonous tendrils threaded throughout the Flayness. The unnamable hierarch managed to rebuild his organization so quickly in large part due to the influence of a ruthless fighter named Warduke, a mysterious and relentless killer who emerged from nowhere after the Greyhawk Wars to spread terror and uncertainty among mercenaries, soldiers, and fighting societies of the Barrier Peaks, from the Barrier Peaks to the Solnor Ocean. Warduke is the soldiers' boogeyman, and opponents, seasoned veterans, least hope to see when the battlefield fog clears and reveals the forces of the enemies. Tavern Tale suggests Warduke's hand in the destruction of several complete adventuring parties, including Greyhawk's Company of the Sundered Shield and the Ramshorn Alliance of Shadell. Both groups had crossed lesser agents of the Horn Society in the weeks before their destruction, and the crowned devil heraldic device of the society turned up at both slaughter sites. In both cases, Warduke had been seen in the area. Warduke works alone, preferring to challenge enemies of the Horn Society in direct combat. He cares nothing for decorum, often assaulting his quarry as they emerge battered and tired after a dungeon crawl or prior battle. He speaks with a raspy, otherworldly voice and possesses a morbid sense of humor. He takes pleasure in brutality and tenaciously hounds his enemies. So as far as tactics go for this version of Warduke really encounters enemies who can challenge him in combat. He often tries to deliberately surround himself with his enemies so he can lay waste with his whirlwind attack. And he usually devotes 2 points of his base attack bonus to his armor class and 5 points to his power attack. So this is obviously for 3.5, 3rd edition. If he finds he has trouble hitting a target, he abandons this tactic. If facing an obviously superior foe, or a foe that can consistently stay at a melee range, he isn't afraid to break off combat, usually by using Word of Recall stored in his helm, to plot revenge another day. So the development here says, Warduke makes a perfect enemy for high-level, mightier-than-thou PCs who think they can handle anything a DM can throw at them. If you don't use the Horn Society, make him a big shot in your own evil organization, brought in as special anti-adventurer agent just when your players are riding high on their latest victory. They may not thank you for it later, but they'll remember it forever. So this is one of those things that the writer of this article basically wanted to, or the writers, because it says just by the dungeon staff, they kind of say that you should use him especially to knock your players down a peg, which is kind of a confrontational way of thinking. It's not how I would like to do things myself, but you know, at the same time, it makes sense for his character. So he's this evil fighter who's basically not really worried about honor or anything like that. So he's more about results. So it's one of those things that the player characters may have to run away from. And if they choose not to because he's going to attack when he has the advantage, then at that point it's sort of their own issue. So this version of Warduke, and we'll zoom back in on the stats here. So this version of Warduke is an 18th level fighter with a challenge rating of 20. I'm not going to go over all the stuff that he has here, but we'll just sort of go through the main things like his statistics. So he has a strength of 32, a dexterity of 16, a constitution of 28, intelligence of 13, wisdom of 15, and a charisma of 20. So his stats are significantly better than they were in the Shady Dragon Inn, where he had like 9s and 8s and things along those lines. For feats, he has combat expertise, dodge, exotic weapon proficiency, bastard sword, cleave, greater weapon focus, greater weapons specialization, improved critical, shield bash, mobility, power attack, quick draw, spring attack, track, 2-weapon fighting, weapon focus, weapon specialization, whirlwind attack. It's one of the things that I really don't miss about 3rd edition is just the sheer number of feats and stuff like that. So inherent bonuses. So Warduke has several of his ability scores improved with inherent bonuses from wish spells, often granted to him as payment for particularly important missions. He has a +5 inherent bonus to strength, a +4 inherent bonus to constitution, and a +4 inherent bonus to his charisma. He also carries a +3 Bane versus Humans, Arnakic, yeah, that's a weird word, Flaming Burst, Bastard Sword, a Dagger of Venom, +3 Moderate Fortification, Adamantine, Ceremonial Spiked Full Plate. Dear Lord, these stat blocks are just a mouthful. A +5 Bashing Heavy Steel Shield, Warduke's Helm, Amulet of Health, Gauntlets of Ogre Power, Gauntlets of Giant Strength +6, Boots of Speed, Ring of Protection +3, and a Fearsome Eye Fiendish Graft. So his Fiendish Eye, gives him this Fiendish Eye graft is bright red in color and has a black iris. It grants grafted creature the ability to continuously see invisible creatures as if you were a 20th level spellcaster. In addition, the grafted creature gains a Fear Gaze attack. Anyone within 30 feet of the grafted creature that meets its eyes must make a will saving throw, DC 16, or be paralyzed with fear for 1d4 rounds. Warduke's Helm is a major artifact. He gained his helm from the unnamable Hierarch himself as payment for a particularly destructive and successful mission. The helm is infused with powerful evil and bestows 2 negative levels on any non-evil creature that puts it on. If a lawful good creature puts on the helm, the faceplate vanishes and long spikes begin to grow from the inner surface of the helm, dealing 2d6 slashing damage per round to the victim. An evil creature gains several benefits by wearing the helm. It grants low light vision to the wearer, as well as a natural armor bonus equal to his charisma modifier, minimum +1. The wearer also gains a +10 competence bonus on intimidates checks and spell resistance of 10 plus his character level. So in this case, he'd have spell resistance of 28. The faceplate of the helm is set with 3 rubies, one of which is larger than the other 2. The 2 smaller rubies each allow the wearer to cast a quickened, still silent death knell. When the user casts the spell, one of the 2 small rubies glows red for the duration of the effect. As long as a ruby is glowing, it cannot cast a death knell. Thus, Warduke can be under the effects of 2 death knell spells from his helm at the same time. And the large rupee can store a 6th level spell, as if a ring of spell storing, and he uses it typically for a ward of recall. It says, note, Warduke has far better statistics and better possessions, including a major artifact, than most NPCs of his level. That's why he's got the challenge rating of 20 for an 18th level character. So there you go. Those are sort of the main statistics for Warduke. And the last thing that I want to show off is just the fact that I also have the Warduke miniature from the D&D Minis lines. This came from, I think it was the War Drums set, if I recall correctly. But you've got the actual Warduke miniature. He's back to being right-handed, unfortunately, which kind of sucks. He's only ever portrayed as left-handed, I think, in that artwork there. But he's got his shield, he's got the helmet, the ceremonial armor, which covers very little. Just a really, really cool figure. He was obviously one of the rares. He's one of the more sought-after rares, I believe, from that set. And so there you go. That is all the references that I have to Warduke in my own personal collection. It's not a lot. I wish I had the action figure, and I believe he also appeared in several modules or adventures for Dungeons & Dragons, particularly ones in the Mystara setting. I don't know a whole lot about that. It's some of those things that I'm looking to research and see if I can find any of those old modules. But anyway, so like I said, that is Warduke. So let me know in the comments below, has your party ever encountered Warduke? Did you ever own the action figure? What are your thoughts of the evil fighter? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we will see you next time. Funding for this channel is provided by my awesome supporters over on Patreon. So everyone who has donated to that, from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much. Even $1 a month helps immensely, and without your guys' support, this channel would not be possible. I want to provide special thanks to Kennedy S., David L., Will W., Michael L., the Twisted Tentacle Inn, and Roll Stats for their generous donations. Thank you again to everyone who's contributed, and all of you make this possible.